Welcome to the Real Estate Investor Podcast. I'm your host, Gary Lipsky of Break of Day Capital. I talk to leading experts to discuss a wide range of subjects to educate investors on best-in-class practices to build legacy wealth and positively impact communities. Let's jump in. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Real Estate Investor Podcast. I'm your host, Gary Lipsky with Break of Day Capital. Be sure to join our Facebook group, Asset Management Mastery, where we have a great community of thousands of like-minded individuals sharing resources and best practices. Hi, listeners. I have some exciting news for you. I'm hosting the virtual Invest Smart Summit on June 6th. We'll cover how to more effectively evaluate sponsors, markets, and deals. We'll have one of the nation's top tax advisors, Tom Wheelwright, speak. And wealth isn't only about money. We'll also have Sahil Bloom, the New York Times bestselling author of The 5 Types of Wealth, and the acclaimed thought leader and life strategist, Tim Storey, join us. This is an event you won't want to miss. Go to investsmartsummit.com right now so that you can live your best life.
Choosing the right insurance coverage for multifamily properties isn't that complicated if you know who to talk to. At the Garzella Group, we're uniquely qualified to help you navigate the range of policy choices you have, and we're committed to saving you 30% in the process. We do intensive market research and have nationwide relationships, so we can find coverage other insurance brokers simply can't. We should talk. Go to quotenow.biz and we'll start the conversation.
Today on the podcast, we have Neal Bawa returning. Neal has been on episode 5, 116, and 185, and always shares a ton of great knowledge. If you haven't listened to those episodes, I strongly suggest you do. Neal is a technologist who is universally known in real estate circles as the Mad Scientist of Multifamily. Neal is a data guru, process freak, and outsourcing expert with almost $1 billion in assets in his portfolio. Welcome, Neal. Can you start by telling Welcome, Neal. Can you start by telling the listeners a little bit more about yourself and what you do?
Absolutely. So I'm a technologist, computer science degree. Have had a successful tech career for 15 years running a company in Silicon Valley. And while I was doing that, I was investing in real estate for tax reasons, because I live in California. And so invested for 10 years myself and sold my company in 2013, had a massive tax bill, started buying large multifamily to get rid of that tax bill. And that sort of turned into a inadvertent career in 2014. And so over the last 11 years, about 1,300 accredited investors have given us $425 million of their money to buy and build slightly over $1 billion in assets.
Very impressive. Well, there are 2 letters that get spoken about every single day ad nauseum, and they are AI. Obviously, AI is an incredible tool that everyone should be using for their business. So I want to talk to you about how you're using AI in real estate.
Sure. Yeah, it's very interesting, right? A lot of people, I think I find that AI is extraordinarily powerful, but you have to have a lot of motivation in really applying it to what you want to do, right? And what I find is this application is actually not very difficult, but I still find that even fairly sophisticated people are not using ChatGPT. Sure, they'll ask ChatGPT questions and they'll ask ChatGPT to structure their emails and things like that. That's pretty common, and I see it all the time, and people are getting good at it. But I'm going to give you some specific examples because I really want to get, some aha moments going here. And I want to think about, I want you guys to think about the answer to this question, right? How many syndicators do you think have created custom ChatGPT projects or strings? And I'm not talking about custom programming. I'm talking about custom instructions, which are basically simple instructions that people give to ChatGPT, right? So anyone can give those instructions to do all of the things that they do regularly. I'm going to give you an example of one that we did last week and how it changed a bunch of things. I'll actually read a few things off. So one of the things that we do is that we have a Slack channel, right? Just like a Teams channel for every one of our properties. And so as you can imagine, every month we pull a CoStar report for the property. and we pull a CoStar report for the submarket, right? And I think lots and lots and lots of others, syndicators do this if they have access to CoStar or RealPage or Yardi or a similar tool. And they throw that in there. And that's the thing that is being done. But we live in an artificial intelligence world. So it actually doesn't make sense to keep doing that. So last week we were like, this is a very dumb thing to do. I mean, I have somebody in the Philippines, they pull a CoStar report for the property, they pull a CoStar report for the submarket, and they just throw it there. And I have to read it. Why do I have to read it any longer? Right? So
Right.
we created a custom string. And in this custom string, we said to ChatGPT, I'm going to see if I can bring it up, right? The purpose of this string is to provide detailed summaries on CoStar reports for our properties. Every time a CoStar report is provided, you will automatically provide a detailed summary without asking. In addition, you will also provide a table comparing the most important details from that summary with every other property in our portfolio. Note that you must assume that we are providing, if we are providing a submarket report, that you must assume that we have a property in that submarket, right? Make that assumption. So therefore, we need to compare the good and bad of this submarket with other submarkets, right? Okay, let's get started with one and we'll refine from there. I want you to read this CoStar submarket report and write me a summary. Now, generally, I care the most about, here I'm getting more and more custom. I care the most about absorption, vacancy, incoming supply compared to the size of the submarket, past 12-month rent growth, and projected rent growth. However, don't restrict yourself to these metrics. Give me at least 20 metrics to pick from and compare between our properties.
Yeah, I love that. I think, yes, there's so many people out there that's just doing some basic questions, but like really, really diving in. It can be an incredibly powerful think partner.
It is. I mean, and it's brilliant how quickly it does it, right? So now, and by the way, this string we've given it over the last week because this is a project that's running in the company, right? We'll meet and we'll tweak it. We probably have to tweak it like 20 or 30 times to get things right. Like, let me give you examples of things that we did. So remember, I said, give me a table of the top 10 things or top 20 things. So it gave me top 20 things from the submarket report and the property report, and some of them just were not relevant. I don't care about those things. So first we went through and removed all of those things. Then we went into the report and we said, hey, what about this thing? This is very interesting. Why didn't you put this in there? So it put those in there as well. I'll give you some examples. Give me a moment. So it came up with, it came up with this stuff on its own. It was pretty good, right? Vacancy rate, 12-month absorption, number of units under construction, 12-month asking rent growth, market rent per unit in the submarket, rent per square foot, forecast rent per square foot in percentage growth, stuff like that, right? Construction ratios, average sales price per unit, average vacancy at sale. So it gave me a lot of stuff, but some of this stuff I typically don't know what to do with. So I basically had it remove that. Then after that, we said, okay, this table that you're giving me, I need something visually because now I've got a bunch of properties. You're giving me one column per property of mine, right? So let's do this. Can you color code it? And he says, yeah, I can color code it. So I said, okay, the property that has the best should be green, and the property that has the worst should be red, and everything else can just be regular black. And then it got it wrong sometimes because sometimes it would basically consider, like, if a submarket has more units in construction, it would make it green. And I'm like, no, I'm a landlord. If there's a lot of units under construction, that's red. That's bad. I don't want there to be a lot of construction coming into this submarket because it competes with my property. So I had to flip it around, right? So I had to give it some instructions and flip it around. But now imagine every single time a person in the Philippines just simply throws a property report and a submarket report in there. No instructions, right? Because it's already got instructions. It then generates this beautiful report, right? And here's the report that it generates because we've given it a lot of information, right? Demand and absorption. Here's the absorption in this submarket. Here's the vacancy. Here are the rent trends. Here's the rent peaks, recent deliveries, supply pipeline, construction activity in this submarket. What's happening in the last 12 months, sales activities, the investment dynamics, who's investing, right? Who are the people investing? Historical and forecast trends, key metrics table, right? It gives me all of this. And then it compares this submarket to every other property that I own, including using those red and green colors. And all my staff has to do is to click that little copy button at the end and now paste it into the Slack channel along with the submarket report and the property report. And I have to tell you this, in the last 3 days, I haven't read any property or submarket reports. I'm just reading what ChatGPT is saying. Because not only is it giving me everything I need, it's actually giving me more. Because the truth is, I never have the time to read 200-page reports. So half the time I don't read the reports. Now I'm reading a 2.5, 3-page summary that I have custom created for my own tastes. And now it's in a Slack channel. Can you see how much more powerful that is, and how simple it is? Sure, one time we had to go in and give it a shit ton of instructions, but it will never forget this, right? Because this string, we only do this inside of this string. And we have projects where we have, different kinds of strings. So we have, acquisition strings, and we have, asset management strings, and all these kinds of strings. So this is now stored, right? I do not think that I could hire a person in the Philippines or in the US to do this job, even at this level of competency, even if they spent 5 hours going through this report. This now that it's done, it takes roughly, you basically throw in the two reports, and it does it in about 35, 40 seconds.
Wow. Very powerful.
Right? I mean, what I just gave you, it sounds like, oh yeah, this is actually really easy to do. But the question is, why don't you apply it to every single thing that you do? Yeah. Right? So when you're underwriting properties, here's another one, right? So absorption metrics, right? I'm gonna actually search absorption, submarket absorption report, right? So here's a new one. Help me structure this spec for my team. Toby and Danilo, for our key development markets, it's extremely important that we understand absorption rates in the market together with the development pipeline for each submarket. You will run a report to pull CoStar reports for every submarket that we are currently looking at for development projects, starting with Reno, Northwest Arkansas, Kansas City, Missouri, blah, 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 more stuff about that, right? And then I basically tell them, that every single property that I've already put in LOI or PSA status, so letter of intent or purchase and sale agreement, you're going to also pull those. And what you're going to do is that you're going to have CoStar provide an absorption metric. And that absorption metric is on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is the submarket with the greatest absorption in human history. And 1 is a submarket that has no absorption or horribly negative absorption, right? Absorption is a submarket's ability to take in new supply and get it leased up without without increasing the market's vacancy. So if the market had 400 units that came into a Charlotte submarket and the market absorbed 400 units, well, then what would happen is vacancy wouldn't change. If it was 95, it's still going to be 95. Then the market's absorbed. Now, if that Charlotte submarket ended up absorbing the 400 units, but vacancy increased by 1%, well, then it really didn't absorb the units, right? Some of those units are empty. They didn't get leased up. So absorption is a very powerful metric. And what we realized was that our underwriters, and we have 3 staff underwriters. These are full-time employees. They're very smart, right? 2 of them are in the US. 1 is in the Philippines. Very smart people. But even amongst somebody whose full-time job is to play with the numbers, they were getting biased by 1 word here or 2 words there in some report. 1 word here in the summary, 2 words there. So now we were like, no, you know what? We want an objective metric. And that metric says, what is this submarket's absorption status, right? So here is a submarket. So let's see. This is a market called Liberty, Missouri. And Liberty, Missouri is in the Kansas City metro. And this submarket got a score of 8.1, right, out of 10. And it went on, basically said, this is why I ranked it. Because every time I asked it to do something, I said, could you please explain why you did this and what's the algorithm that you used? Because sometimes it gets it wrong. I mean, often it gets it wrong, right? So my whole point is, I almost never find ChatGPT to get this kind of stuff right the first time. So the initial setup is where the human brain is superior to ChatGPT. Because we're like, no, that algorithm doesn't make any sense. So then it gave us 8.1. So then what I did was I called one of my staff and I said, give me all of the submarkets in Kansas City. So it gave me like 9 or 10 submarkets. So I threw all of them in there. And then I said, now that you've seen all of the submarkets in Kansas City, what is the score for Liberty, Missouri? Now it's 6.5. So what was interesting was it learned from the different markets and realized that the 8.1 score was too high. So compared to the other markets, now that market score has gone down to 6.5. So you realize how quickly this thing learns by just reading a bunch of reports that you've provided, and you learn that what the quality of the markets is. So we have our Shark Tank for either acquisitions or new development is every other week. So one's called Multifamily Multifamily Huddle. The other one is called Groundbreaker Summit. So Groundbreakers for development, right? So every 2 weeks now, on the first page for every property, we have a metric, and that metric is called the ChatGPT absorption metric, right? With a number like from 1 to 10, and then a bracket where it says this submarket where you're investing in is in the top 25 percentile or top 50th percentile or top 75th percentile, right? All of this is happening with somebody just throwing in the submarket report for whatever market we are looking to buy in. And this one we've been doing for about 7 months, 8 months. You would be stunned, Gary, at how much better our underwriters are at simply not presenting a submarket to us. Earlier, what was happening is they would look at a submarket and the property would be very nice, so they'd present it to us, but the submarket was shit. It had minus 200 units of absorption, which essentially meant people were leaving this submarket, right? And so now that submarket score is like 1 or 2 out of 10. They just don't present the properties, right? Now, use this example, this absorption metric example that I gave you, and apply it dozens of times across your portfolio, acquisitions, asset management, and you'll have a very, very good idea of how we use ChatGPT. And here's one cool tip. Every time you're done with creating the string, the last instruction that we always give is, give us 5 recommendations in plain language, in plain English, of what we should do to make things better, just to make things better. Here's an example. Yesterday, I read this in one of our strings. We have a property that's doing quite well. It's at 94% occupied. It's called Park Avenue Villas. It's in Chattanooga. Doing fine. This property is doing fine, right? I wouldn't have an insight to what this thing said. Here's what it said. Your property is generally quite well balanced against the marketplace, but I've noticed that your 2-bedroom rents are just too high, and you continuously stay under occupied on these 2-bedroom units. I think that you can actually raise your 1-bedroom rents by $25, and I suggest that, but I suggest that you consider dropping your 2-bedroom rents by $25. I have an asset manager with 15 years of experience, Kimberly. She hadn't figured this out. The moment it went there, 5 minutes later, she said, this sucker is right. I'm dropping 25 rents by $25 on 2 bedrooms and increasing them on 1 bedroom. Now you might say, this is something that they should know. They do, analysis, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but the CoStar report itself has 10, 11 properties that are part of the submarket comp number. And remember how this string is getting smarter. Every single month, we put in the report again. Now it still remembers the report from the previous month. Then it still remembers it from the month before. What asset manager in the world is going to remember that, right? Human beings cannot remember it. She can open it and she can look at where things are today. But ChatGPT now has a memory of the last 7 times this report was put in. And so it can say things like, you're always under occupied on the 2 bedrooms. That's the power of this tool. I don't think that there are any asset managers in the world that could come up with that insight without hours and hours of study. This does it because we ask it a simple question. Give us 5 ways to improve this.
Yeah, I love it. And every data point you have just builds on the next and allows you to have more informed, better decisions in the future. So yeah, incredible work.
Comparisons, right? I mean, imagine how complex the coding would be for me to grab an entire CoStar report and write the code to compare that against 6 other CoStar reports of 6 other properties. That would take forever. But I'm just amazed that I watch and it's building the table. It builds it as a graphic, right? So it's got rows and columns, and it takes about 30 seconds, and it says analyzing, and it builds it. And it's like, this is about 6 to 8 hours of work for somebody that is doing in about 25 or 30 seconds. And some of the work that it's doing, humans just can't do because we don't have the memory bandwidth to do it. So what we have started to do, and we continuously do this, is every quarter we give away prizes for best use of ChatGPT, right? And early on, Gary, the first year that we did it, every time the award was won by marketing. So what we did was we jury rigged the system so the marketing department can only win once in a year out of 4. And now we have acquisitions winning, asset management. Here's the perfect one for asset management, right? We thought we were really, really good at asset management because we have, in every single email update that we send for any asset, at the bottom of it are the links to every single investor update that has ever been sent on this property. Slick, right? I mean, so what we tell people is you can never lose investor updates because all you have to do is go into your email, type in the word investor update, find the most recent one, and the one that you're looking for, scroll down at the bottom, all the links are there, right? And people love it. They're like, oh, I can never really lose the investor updates, right? Because that's all I have to know. And we thought this is pretty cool until one of the people in our asset management team said, why don't I create a custom string in ChatGPT? We have multiple ChatGPT accounts, but there's one company ChatGPT account that everyone has access to and people have their own folders. So he said, why don't I create a string for every single property? And then all I have to do is, there's been about 25 times we have reported to our investors on this property. And that link is actually a live link. Like anybody that has that link can read that investor update. I'm going to throw those, all 25 of them in to ChatGPT. And I'm going to say, ChatGPT, I want you to learn everything about this property, these 25 updates, right? Everything that you want, that we should know about this property should be in there. And write me a report. And then he turns on a button at the bottom called Deep Research. Deep Research is a button that allows ChatGPT to be much better, but it takes roughly 15 to 20 minutes for it to write the report. And it only comes with the pro accounts. So ChatGPT for this particular property, it was called Park Canyon in Chattanooga, wrote this 25-page report. Now what we do is that we've managed to, and so some of our staff actually doesn't know the answers to the questions that come in from the investors, right? Because they're not senior enough to know that. So what they used to do is they'd basically send it to an asset manager. They don't do it anymore because what they do is every single update, they stick it into this string, and then they ask ChatGPT the answer to the question, which it writes the answer to. Then they show that to the asset manager and say, is this the appropriate answer? 9 out of 10 cases, the asset manager doesn't even edit it. And actually, the asset managers have told me that ChatGPT is doing a better job of explaining the answer than I could have done because I just give a flippant, somewhat flippant one-line answer. It's actually going through and explaining and saying, well, in October 2023, we had explained to you that this was going to happen and this is da 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 da. So it goes through because it remembers all 25 updates. It actually goes back and provides context to it, which we've asked it to do. And so all incoming investor questions are now asked to ChatGPT, and then we check the answers. Imagine the time saving. We have 1,315 investors.
Yeah. Wow. And like you said, is you're getting better answers. Because you're providing a lot more detailed information based on the reports. It's I love it. I love it.
And the deep research feature is key because what I find is that it spends a lot more time learning those investor updates. So for investor updates, you have to turn deep research off the first time. The first time it's done, it now has learned all of that stuff at a very deep level, and then you can keep throwing in new investor updates links, and it learns them just fine, and it adds to its memory. It's brilliant how it does this. The key thing is to tell it to put that report in, because what happens is it does forget, but if it puts the report into the string, then it always reads it. The next time you throw something in, it goes back and reads everything first, refreshes its memory, then starts to work on it. So a lot of people, they do little portions of it, but you really have to understand how this software works, because it clearly has vulnerabilities. It clearly forgets things, and it does that obviously for for cost reasons. So you have to know how to position it in such a way that it doesn't forget. And then when you put in the next piece of information, it's really, really empowered and ready. So I find that for hundreds and hundreds of things that we are doing in the company, ChatGPT has become the professor. It's become the person that everybody goes to first, and then you tweak from there. So, and the cool thing is we have a ChatGPT of assets and a ChatGPT of K1s and a ChatGPT of everything else, and it's still one account that costs us $25 a month or $20 a month, right? The value that we're receiving is so freaking mind blowing. But there's definitely a lot of work that goes into first creating the professor of K1s, the professor of CoStar reports. So I think that initial work, I don't think enough people are doing it. I certainly don't see enough people doing some of the stuff that I'm talking about. And I think it's astonishingly powerful. Like one of the things that we're doing is we now do not have lawyers write contracts. Right? So what we've done is we've taken all of the contracts that lawyers have written in the past for all of our development properties, all of our properties, and we've trained one ChatGPT string for development purchase and sale agreements, and another one for acquiring properties purchase and sale agreements. And so what we found is, and the questions we ask it, Gary, are things like, these are 15 different contracts. Tell me which ones were the best and which ones were the worst, and rank them. And usually in the name of the contract, we provided the lawyer that wrote it. So it actually tells us which lawyers are better, right? Because it's actually telling you. Then we basically say something like, what are the top 10 vulnerabilities in these contracts, right? And what are the best parts of this contract? And then we say, if you were a law professor from Harvard, how would you improve these contracts, right? And then we say, okay, taking all of the best practices of all of these, can you write a new purchase and sale agreement for a property and have XXX where the name of the property and its address and everything else should be? So leave blanks there and you write it. And then it writes that. Then we send those to our lawyers for their approvals. And several lawyers have come back to us and says, this was very comprehensive. How did you, where did you get it from?
I mean, that saves tens of thousands of dollars. It could at times. That's a huge savings.
Massive save, right? So I think that the key part, of course, is we never try and not send it to the lawyer, because the lawyer may know about some change in the law that happened 20 days ago. So in every instance, we're not necessarily trying to save money, though there's a lot of saving of money. But we find that given the right instructions, given the right information from all these great lawyers from before, ChatGPT can be turbocharged where it basically becomes better than them. And you still have to check with the lawyer anyway.
So obviously, you're using some of these data points from the property submarkets for investing, but are you doing anything? I mean, I'm sure you are, but like, are you pulling tons and tons of other reports to figure out where the best markets are, or how are you using it for that regard?
So what we found was, and this was interesting because it came from a conversation with ChatGPT, what we're doing now, Gary, is we used to be very focused on population growth, job growth, and those are important. There's no doubt in my mind that, because absorption in a submarket is tied to population and job growth, right? So if you're producing more renter households, then absorption is going to be greater. But you've already got that data from CoStar, right? So we started thinking about, in today's market where rent growth is not good, what's the best way to game the system? Because we're always looking to game the system, right? To whatever level possible, legally. And actually, in a lot of different conversations with ChatGPT, thinking about how this would work or how that would work, what we realized was in Q2 2025, the best way is not to focus on job growth and population growth. The best thing is to buy properties, high quality properties, in submarkets that have had a very, very large amount of delivery in the last 12 to 18 months, but have no deliveries in the next 12 to 18 months. So maximum level of delivery possible in the last 12 to 18, and nothing or almost nothing in the next 12 to 18. Why is that important? Because we've seen that all of those submarkets, regardless of how high quality they are, how much demand there is, how many Google jobs there are, how many Amazon jobs there are, the rents have gotten hammered. And so what's happened is, if the submarket's fair rent is $1.68 a square foot, today the rent is $1.50. And I'm sure you know that if we can simply hold on to this property and over the next 2 years, return those rents back to market, that's actually better than value add, because $150 per unit value add still doesn't raise your rents by 16, 18 cents. Obviously, there's a cost to that value add, and you have to factor that in. So if a market has become 10 to 15% under market because of the extraordinary incoming supply, but it doesn't have any supply in the future, that's a phenomenal submarket. And I'll give you an example of how it sometimes works and it sometimes doesn't. Lakeland, Florida is often considered to be the fastest growing market in the United States for population, right? Great market, nothing wrong with it. It's halfway between Orlando and Tampa. Great market. But this strategy doesn't work there. You know why? There are 1,200 units that have been delivered in Lakeland in the last 18 months. So that part of it works really well. Hammered, right? Rents are hammered. But there's also 800 units coming in the next 12 months. So while by itself, it's a decent market, it's not my favorite right now. But there are markets in Kansas City, like Overland Park. Very nice market, very upscale. 800, 900 units delivered over the last 12 months. No units getting delivered in the next 2 years. None at all. And rents in that submarket have dropped by 10%. So when I buy a value-add asset in Overland Park today, I'm not saying I'm buying one, just an example, I'm getting an enormous tailwind. And as you can imagine, it's really, really hard to do all of this stuff manually. So we've trained a ChatGPT string to do this, right? And we throw 50, 60, 80 submarket reports, and it just ranks the 80 submarkets by looking at the total size of the submarket. That's where it starts. Then looking at how many units were delivered in the last 12 months, and then it creates a percentage number. And then it looks at the same information in the future, in the next 2 years. And then it contrasts those two numbers and says, here's where the gap is the highest. It would take us forever to do this. We might even give up because it's too much work. But it does it naturally. So every time we look at a new market, we throw another 10 reports in there, and now our list of 80 ranked submarkets becomes 90, becomes 100, right? So that's how we're using it to acquire properties.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Neal, I know our time is up, but again, so much value. Appreciate you coming on and sharing all the great things that you're doing. Where can listeners find out more about your company?
Multifamily University. And that's multifamilyu.com. It is an education portal for all things commercial, multifamily, self-storage, industrial, office flex, all those kinds of things. We publish 8 power-packed webinars a year. Last year, 11,000 people registered for those webinars. And we basically pour all of our knowledge into these webinars. We have a 2-part impact of AI webinar coming up in the next month or two. It was so big that we had to actually break it into 2 webinars. There were 100+ slides. And so I think people come in, they learn, there is no upsell. There is no, we don't have an educational product. We don't have any intentions of creating an educational product. We're happy just managing people's money. So out of those 11,000, Gary, only 1,000 are our investors. Everybody else is just receiving this information. We think of ourselves as the Wikipedia of real estate data when it comes to commercial. And so we give it away. It's completely meant to be given away. There's no restrictions on anybody, and people just use the data and enjoy it. So check it out. There's 8 webinars every year, and they're all very fun and interesting.
Awesome. Thank you, Neal. Appreciate it. This is Gary Lipsky signing off. I'll be back next week with another informative episode on the Real Estate Investor Podcast. To all of our listeners, thanks for joining us. And if you like this episode, please head over to iTunes or Stitcher and like, subscribe, and leave a review, as it will help us reach more people. And if you'd like to learn more about what we do at Break of Day Capital, head over to our website at breakofdaycapital.com and sign up for our newsletter and fill out our investor application. We'll talk to you next week.